Hi, back with Sophia, and you're in the right place. This is my story about how I achieved fluency in English. I'm excited to take you along so you can improve your listening and reading skills through my story. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Beginning. I grew up in a small, quiet town called Meadowville. Everyone in my town spoke Spanish. English was something I didn't hear much. Sometimes, I would hear English in movies or on TV, but I didn't understand what the people were saying. English seemed far away, like something from another world. When I turned 10 years old, things changed. In school, my teacher, Mr. Patel, introduced us to English. He started with the alphabet. I was excited to learn a new language. The letters were familiar to me because they looked like the letters in my own language, but the way they sounded was very different. At first, I thought, this will be easy. I was wrong. As we learned more words, I realized that English was full of rules, and for every rule, there was an exception. I couldn't understand why some words sounded the way they did. For example, why is C in cat different from C in circle? I started to feel confused. English was not as easy as I thought. One day, Mr. Patel gave us a short story to read in English. I looked at the page, but I didn't understand much. I felt frustrated. The words on the page seemed like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I thought, maybe I'll never be good at English. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't give up. English was an important language. I needed to learn it, not just for school, but for my future. Chapter 2. Meeting Mrs. Johnson. One afternoon, when I was 12, my neighbor Mrs. Johnson invited me over for tea. Mrs. Johnson was a retired teacher. She had traveled to many countries and spoke English fluently. When I told her about my struggles with English, I expected her to agree that English was difficult. But instead, she smiled at me and said, "Sophia, learning English is like learning to ride a bike. At first, you fall, but if you keep trying, soon you'll be able to ride without thinking about it." That made me feel a little better. Mrs. Johnson then offered to help me with my English. I was very happy to have her help. She invited me to come over to her house after school a few days each week. We didn't do regular lessons like at school. Instead, she made learning English fun. Mrs. Johnson showed me how to enjoy English. We watched movies in English with subtitles, sang English songs, and read short stories together. She made the language come alive. She taught me that English wasn't just about grammar and rules. It was about using words to communicate, to tell stories, and to understand the world. One of the first movies we watched was The Lion King. I had seen it before, but only in my native language. Watching it in English was a whole new experience. Mrs. Johnson explained some of the words I didn't know. I realized that learning English wasn't just about memorizing rules. It was about understanding and feeling the language. Chapter 3. School Struggles. Even though Mrs. Johnson was helping me, school was still difficult. I remember one day we had an important English test. I had studied for hours the night before. I memorized grammar rules, learned new vocabulary, and practiced writing sentences. I thought I was ready. But when I saw the test paper, I panicked. My mind went blank. The words on the page looked familiar, but I couldn't remember how to put them together. I felt so nervous. After the test, my best friend Mia came to check on me. Mia was very good at English. "Sophia? What happened? You studied so hard," Mia said, looking worried. "I don't know," I replied, trying to hold back my tears. "It's like I forgot everything. Maybe I'll never be good at English." Mia smiled at me. "Don't worry. It's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning something new." That made me feel a little better. I realized that Mia was right. I didn't have to be perfect. Learning a language isn't about being perfect right away. It's about trying, practicing, and learning from your mistakes. I decided that from now on, I would focus on getting better little by little, not on being perfect. Chapter 4. A Trip to the City. A few months later, my family planned a trip to the city. This was exciting for me because the city was very different from my small town, but it also made me nervous. In the city, many people spoke English. I knew that I would have to use my English skills more than ever before. On our first morning in the city, we went to a cafe for breakfast. The waitress came to take our order. She spoke in English. My parents looked at me, knowing I had been practicing. My heart started to beat fast. I didn't want to make a mistake, but I knew I had to try. I took a deep breath and said, "I would like a coffee, please." The waitress smiled and wrote down my order. She understood me. I felt so proud. It was a small sentence, but for me, it was a big step. It was the first time I used English in a real-life situation without being too scared. After that moment, I tried to use English more during our trip. I asked for directions in English. I spoke to the hotel staff in English, and I even tried to have a short conversation with a shopkeeper. Each time I used English, I felt a little more confident. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could become fluent in English one day. Chapter 5. Building a Routine. When we came back from the city, I felt more motivated than ever. I knew I had to keep practicing if I wanted to get better. So, I created a routine to practice English every day. I knew that the more I used English, the easier it would become. Every morning, I listened to English podcasts during breakfast. I found podcasts made for people learning English. The speakers talked slowly, and I could understand them. I liked hearing different accents and learning new words. After school, I would watch TV shows in English. My favorite show was Friends. The conversations were funny and easy to follow. I learned a lot of everyday phrases from that show. Smash that like button if you know the show. But the most helpful thing was joining an online language exchange group. In this group, people from all over the world practiced English with each other. That's where I met Maria. Maria was from Brazil, and she was learning English too. We became language partners. Every day, we talked for 30 minutes in English. At first, It was difficult. We made many mistakes, and sometimes there were long pauses because we didn't know how to say something. But we didn't give up. We helped each other, and we got better together. Chapter 6. A breakthrough moment. After a year of practicing every day, something amazing happened. One afternoon, I was sitting in the park with Mrs. Johnson. We were talking about a book I had just finished reading in English. After a few minutes, Mrs. Johnson looked at me and smiled. "Sophia, do you know you've been speaking in English this whole time?" she asked. I hadn't realized it. I was so focused on the conversation that I didn't even think about it. I wasn't translating words in my head or worrying about grammar. I was just speaking. That was the moment I realized I had become fluent in English. I didn't need to be perfect. I could communicate and express myself, and that's what mattered. Chapter 7. What I Learned. If you are learning English, I want to tell you this. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes when they are learning something new. The important thing is to keep practicing. Watch English movies, listen to English music, and talk to people in English as much as you can. Or, here's the good news. You're already on the right path by being here. On this channel, I'll continue to provide you with the tools and resources you need to improve your English, and it's for free. So, subscribe. Keep yourself on the track. Learning English isn't about being perfect. It's about getting better little by little. It takes time, but if you keep practicing, you will improve. One day, you'll be able to speak English without even thinking about it. Keep going. You can do it. Believe in yourself and don't give up. You will achieve fluency in English, just like I did. Sophia here, and I'll see you in the next video.